The past 30 days, we've unpacked practical and philosophical areas for how to launch a healthy family ministry. Today, we're going to deal with your frequently asked questions, and many of you submitted some really insightful ones. The most frequent question asked was, how do I, step by step, get my church towards launching a healthy family ministry? Because so many of you asked that, I'm going to hold that one to the end. The very first question we're going to deal with today comes from Thomas, where he asks, how, if possible, do you get parents to buy in to the need for family discipleship? So the first thing to do is to remind ourselves that Deuteronomy 6 reminds us that it's about a way of life. It's not just about what happens at church. Deuteronomy 6 says, as you go by your way, as you sit down to eat, as you tuck them in bed at night, parents just need to simply understand it's the little bitty things that they can do. They are not going to immediately know what they are. And so your role as a ministry leader, as a teacher, is to actually coach them into the little helps that's provided in your small group studies, or maybe the practical side of, have you ever shown your parents how to pray with your kids? Bring parents together in a session all by themselves, or maybe you're just dealing with them one-on-one in the hallway and their son or daughter is not around, and you say, hey, let me share with you how to pray with your kids as you tuck them in bed. Or if they're a teenager, how to pray with them before they walk out the door. And you just model that with them. And when we think about sports, they're so involved in sports, connect with them on that level. They know that the coaches send home practice drills, how to improve their throwing, their kicking, their music playing, whatever it is, whether it's music or sports, they understand drills and rehearsal and practice away from the time with the coach. So you're going to do the same thing. You're going to give them practical insights on items that they can do when they're not at church. Do you realize how many parents just don't know what to say, but if you hand it to them, they'll do it? Just like when the coach hands off those drills when they go home. And that can happen by gathering the parents together once a quarter. Imagine the teacher having a 15-minute meeting. Everybody can spare 15 minutes. Get them together in your room where your students meet and say, hey, they can even stand for 15 minutes. Here's what we're going to be teaching the next 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks. Here's what I want you as parents to emphasize. And we talk about some of those takeaways. And if you have a curriculum that helps them do that, win, win, win all the way around. Now, one more way that really gets parents' attention that we found, list out the ways you as parents are similar to your parents. The good habits and the bad habits. My wife can give a long list of areas I'm very similar to my dad or my mom, and they're not always flattering. And the truth is we've caught some of those habits along the way, the good ones and the bad ones. Once they see they're modeling, mimicking what their parents did, then you turn that around and say, what are you passing along to your son or daughter? When they realize that, then they're going to begin to go, oh, no, I don't want them to get that. Just think about, how do we take church home? That's how we get parents involved. Our next question comes from Daniel, who asks, what suggestions do you have for making D6 work with the blended family culture where the kids or families are there every other Sunday or 2 Sundays out of 4? This, too, is a very common question because of the blended family culture. I need to remind you that I came from a blended family. My parents divorced when I was a teenager, and I understand what it's like to kind of live in both of those worlds, each trying to live in the moment to please that parent. We need to help that child who's struggling with that identity there. And one of the ways that we do that is to stop insisting on a 1/168 mentality. For us to even ask that question says, I don't get them but 2 out of 4 Sundays, assumes that I'm the only one with help. I'm the only one who can make a difference. And we've got to break that and say it's about launching our kids successfully so that they're doing, acting, and having the right attitude when they're on their own. So to do that, we teach on Sunday and we give them tools and helps to continue their devotional life, their study life on their own Monday through Friday or Saturday when they're away from church. If this were a child who had to miss class in school for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, what would we do if we were the school teacher? We would make sure that, number one, we didn't fail them. Number two, we would make sure they have the curriculum, the homework assignments, and we were coaching them even from a distance. That's all it takes here. The church can come alongside and make a huge impact and know that even though they have to miss every other week, we can affirm them when they come back. And we go, hey, you've kept pace. Even though you weren't here, you're not left behind. You're right alongside them. We can text them, we can email them, we can, post on Facebook some connection to affirm them when they're not there at Sunday, to know that they're not forgotten, and that will ensure they're going to keep working hard in order to keep pace and stay right along with the class. There's a parallel question that John asks. He says, D6 ministry is biblical and best and the goal of all of our ministries. However, a word I've heard at D6 this year, and a word that I live daily, is messy. What are some keys to develop family ministry in my church where so many of my students come on their own without their parents? John, messy's a good word for that. We certainly don't have model families in our church today. While there's a few, the majority of them have real dysfunction and challenges. In fact, in the chapter D6 goes beyond Deuteronomy 6, we talk about biblical examples of imperfect families. Paul adopting Titus. We talk about Esther being adopted by her uncle. The dysfunction that happened between Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. On and on we can go with these biblical examples. And the reality is we do have a lot of children who have either spiritually absent parents or physically absent parents. What then do we do about that? We cannot ignore the fact that when they come to us, they're coming with some type of expectation. It may not be Christ, but that's our goal, is to introduce Christ to them. I know a children's pastor has a very practical way that every new child coming into the children's ministry is greeted. He is taught that when a new student walks into his children's ministry, his kids, peer level, first of all, give them a high five, and at that point, they become their shadow for the day. They have adopted them just for that first time they're there at church. They befriend them, they introduce them to others, they walk alongside, and they don't let them stay alone. And so when we think about adopting each other, let's never assume that it has to be from somebody older to somebody younger. Richard Ross has done some writing on this. Chap Clark has done some extensive writing on it. And he's quick to remind us that we're all part of the family of God. And so the adoption doesn't have to be from a grandparent to a grandchild or parent to a child. It can be peer level. It can actually be from younger to older. Dive in deeper to some of those resources. But we talk about in the book how grandparents who their children may be 500 miles away could have a significant spiritual influence on the ones right there in the church. So can parents who will bring those kids home who, they come over after church on Sundays. They come over during the week. We have a significant influence. So when they come to us and they don't have parents available, here's what I want you to take away. These children are going to grow up to be parents, and we need to break the cycle right now. This is the time so that they know what to do, and we cannot give up just because we don't have their parents present. Give them insight, give them love, give them nourishment, care for them, get other people connected to them. And we're going to see, like we do in business, like we do in sports, there are some breakout kids who had just horrible parents, but they cared enough, and somebody cared enough to invest in them, and that person should be you. In addition to children coming to church alone, Ryan and Jessica ask about grandparents. They ask, when grandparents bring their grandchildren to church, a generation gap occurs. How do we deal with the generation gap and keep grandparents engaged in generational discipleship? I think Ryan and Jessica, having read their independent questions, are attacking this from two different angles. One is asking how to involve grandparents, and another is discussing when the parents between the generations are absent. Let's tackle these both. First of all, in the book, we use the phrase that grandparents are the secret weapon, and they truly are, because who is more fun to be around than grandparents? They have gotten past themselves, and they realize that they can be something special to kids that are small and still have ideals ahead of them, and they can speak well into other people's lives. What I would do is I would have one big grandparent meeting. Everybody who's a grandparent, get them together and cast that vision for the influence of the grandparent. What can they do? And then lay out a plan where we say, grandparents who do not have your grandkids in church, this is what we're going to ask of you. We want you to adopt. We want you to come alongside a grandchild, even if their parents are present. Just have somebody else speaking in their world, which means showing up at their Little League events, showing up at school, functions, whatever they are, but just become more involved in their lives. Grandparents have time for that, and they would be absolutely thrilled with the concept of being involved. But then we've got the grandparents who are bringing their grandchildren, And we're just giving them practical ways to connect. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes their parents are just unplugged spiritually. So we're challenging, just like we do parents to be involved in their children's lives, we need to challenge that set of grandparents. What from our life group, Sunday school, small group lesson can they talk about throughout the week, especially if there's a family alignment? We talked about that before, the importance of keeping the conversations going away from church. What tools can you send home to that grandparent to keep that conversation alive with their grandchildren? Show them how to do it. Now, if the parents are totally out of the picture and the grandkids are living with grandma or granddad, now the roles are totally different. You have to treat that grandparent as the parent. And they have already accepted that they no longer get to be the, hey, I get to be the break from mom and dad, let's go have fun with grandma and grandpa, which isn't always the goal of grandparent ministry, by the way. But they have had to throw that all out and say, I am now their parent, even though I'm grandma or granddad. And so you need to treat them, coach them, educate them, just like you would a parent. So some of the previous answers we've talked about, you go instead to the parent, you go to that grandparent. And you walk them through and you teach them how to pray with their child. You teach them how to have those conversations, how to have deeper conversations, how to connect, how to have that lean in time from the lesson, how to work through some of the respond areas from all the take-home tools that you have. Share the verses, share life together. That's the difference. Don't forget the pink elephant in the room. If that situation is occurring, either they're bringing their grandkids or they're raising their grandkids, that means there's a prodigal situation that's occurred. You need to minister to the heart of that grandparent for how to restore or attempt to restore. And we talk about that in the book, those prayers that we can pray. How do we approach that son or that daughter? How do we begin to make amends without offending or pushing them further away from church? The church just simply needs to bring these groups together and say, what is my list? How can I take them through that? And the ideas that we presented today and in the book will help you create a very practical plan for all grandparents in each of these situations. Brett asks, where do college students, single young adults, and newlyweds fit into the plan for family ministry? Brett, you've really hit a key category that many churches overlook. Those young adults, college age, those newlyweds, they don't have kids, and sometimes they don't even think of themselves as a family. But yet they are kids of somebody, and they are individuals. They have significant identity for who they are and for the church. And God absolutely loves them and hasn't forgotten about them, but the church has along the way. So the key is, let's not lose them between when they graduated from high school to whatever point in the future by ignoring their needs. So my challenge to you would be, number one, ask what are their needs? What are they searching for? What are they looking for? Let's think through some of these obvious ones. Number one, a lot of young adults are in college or just after college, and they have a significant amount of student debt. So helping them manage their finances, helping them reduce that debt, helping them find a good career that they can be plugged into would be substantial, and letting the church come alongside. How do we do that? Offer classes on debt. Offer classes, and don't make them feel guilty for having it. Help them manage it. Offer classes on developing a resume. Connect them with business leaders. Help them think differently. Some of them are concerned with not making the mistakes their parents made. So we can talk through marriage areas for the ones who are married. We can talk through physical fitness. We can talk through so many just practical areas of their life, and just offer that. Those are level 2 classes, by the way, in the Reach and Teach. Those are specific to that community. Those people have felt needs. Some of them will go on to have kids. My wife and I, when we first married, we were married for 7 years before we had our first child. That meant a lot of our peers had kids, and they were in a different season of life than we were, and we needed somebody to identify with. We were in a different group. We need to pull those groups together, give them a curriculum that hits their need, their season of life. And if your curriculum's constantly talking about do this with your children, do this with your son or daughter, they're feeling pretty much left out and ignored. So make sure that we're ministering to their season of life. That would be my challenge. Up until this point, we have dealt with questions relating to the home, and there have been so many questions that we have divided them between home and church, and we have intentionally focused on just the home up until this point. In the next segment, we are going to deal with that wonderful question that we have teased up until this point: how do we step by step build a strong family ministry for our church? So the next segment deals entirely with church emphasis and intentionality.